Why were there so many quack doctors in the Victorian era? These bogus doctors were a scourge of society, for not only would they con you out of your money for sham treatments and useless medicinal elixirs, they could seriously damage your health. Perhaps, at best, you could expect to be out of pocket. At worst, you'd be dead. In these times, like false weights and measures or adulterated food, it wasn't uncommon to pass something or someone off as different to reality to make a profit, if you had the shameless wit, guile and effrontery to do so. You could be an ear doctor one day and, if discovered as a fraud, an eye doctor somewhere else the next, for your contrived medical knowledge could be carefully constructed on a pyramid of lies, advertising and cunning trickery. The scope of this video doesn't allow us to go into these schemes in detail, but if you had a little money, you could set up a practice in any front room, dupe a customer off the street with false advertising, and then give yourself an air of respectability by paying labourers a few pence to ring the bell and come and go, giving a genuine customer the impression that this man is popular, must really know his stuff, and is worth his fee for his professional services. Today, in an account from the 1840s by James Grant, you will hear why, in his opinion, Victorian Londoners were so likely to be conned by quack doctors, how they got away with making a fortune at the cost of the misery of countless victims, and some of the tricks they employed to make money at the expense of people's health. But for all the damage inflicted by these doctors and their dangerous concoctions, our writer tells us that the situation wasn't as bad as the preceding Georgian era, when quackery was rife, some being paid to bring family or foes, deliberately installed with imaginary maladies, through the use of harmful treatments, directly to an untimely end. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. The word quack is etymologically derived from the term quacksalber, the German name for quicksilver, the only substance at one time made use of by unlicensed practitioners in the cure of diseases. The great lexicographer Dr. Johnson defines it thus: to cry as a goose or duck, to be boisterous or chatteringly vain. When viewed as a noun substantive, he defines the word as follows: a vain and boastful pretender of medicinal and other arts. Something more, however, is necessary nowadays to realize our views of a quack. A man must not only make high-sounding pretensions in the department of empiricism, the act of being an impostor or con artist, in which he has chosen to appear, but he must support his pretensions with some degree of adroitness and be more or less successful in duping the public. I am persuaded that there is a much larger amount of quackery in the world, and especially in England, and more especially in London, than most men are in the habit of suspecting. The metropolis swarms with quacks, though it sometimes gets credit for being the most intelligent place in the world. There is not a place in the United Kingdom where the people are so easily duped, where the facility of making victims on the part of empirics is so great, as might therefore be expected, persons of quackish dispositions and quackish pursuits come trooping into London from all parts of the country. There is nothing too ridiculous for a London population to swallow, nothing so absurd that they will not at once subscribe to it. Nor is this predisposition to be duped by empirics, this alacrity in reposing faith in the preposterous promises and pledges of quacks, confined to the lower or less informed part of the London population. It is by no means uncommon among the aristocracy and those whose standing in society implies more than the average amount of education and intelligence. Quacks of all kinds and from all parts of the world flock to London. The success of empirics in former days points it out as the grand field for quackery. In the provinces, we hear comparatively little of empiricism. When it does exist in country towns, it manifests itself in a very modified form. The metropolis, indeed, is almost the only place in which it exists in its pure, unadulterated state. Here it holds up its head without a blush. Here it stalks abroad with most consummate effrontery. It knows that nothing can be too gross, nothing sufficiently outrageous for a considerable part of the population. The quack of 10 or 12 years ago eventually fell into the hands of the law and suffered severe punishment for his traffic in human life. But the quack of 1841 is too cunning to be caught in that way. He neither prescribes nor administers medicine himself. He deems it enough that he prepares it. The administration of it he prudently leaves to other persona called agents, and consequently when any accident, which being translated means death, is clearly proved to have resulted from an overdose, they, and not he, must submit to the consequences. He, like his great predecessor, is also a universalist. Let me not be misunderstood. I do not mean that he holds that class of religious opinions indicated by the term universalist. What I mean is that his medicines are represented as being of universal efficacy, or as possessing the power of curing all manner of diseases. There is not a malady under heaven, no, nor anywhere else, which does not promptly yield, if the manufacturer's word may be credited, to the more than miraculous potency of the wonderful medicine in question. It matters not, though it be proved over and over again in a court of law that persons have died after taking a certain number of the little globular substances into which it is formed. The circumstance, when it does occur, is of easy explanation. The fault was not in the pills, it was in the unlucky patient who swallowed them. If he were killed by taking 10 of these pills at once, he ought to have taken 20, and his recovery would have been both speedy and entire. If he did take 20, and died with a wonderful alacrity afterwards, his perfect restoration to health in the short space of a few days would have been as certainly the consequence of taking 40, as light is in the effect of the sun's making his appearance in the firmament. Of medical quacks, men who know nothing of the first principles of medicine, who are at present living at the expense of the pockets, the health, and even lives of the more credulous portion of the metropolitan community, there are at least 100. I myself could mention the names of nearly 50. I am sure I do not exaggerate when I say that upwards of £200,000 are annually expended on the quack doctors and quack medicines of the metropolis. The expedients to which some empirics have recourse with the view of humbugging the public are infinitely diversified and, in many instances, very ingenious. Advertising in the public journals is a favourite expedient. Some of their announcements are exceedingly curious in their way. They are in many cases lofty and confident in their tone. They undertake to cure every disease, however inveterate, in a mere fraction of time, at a trifling expense, and without the slightest pain or the least inconvenience to the patient. In other cases, the empirics find it the best policy to confine themselves to a few diseases, those of course most prevalent, and then to undertake to cure them in all their varied forms. Could a person only divest his mind for the time of the painful reflection that these quacks are traffickers in human suffering and human life, to say nothing of their robbery of individuals, who in thousands of cases pay their fees at the expense of their ordinary meals, he would enjoy with no ordinary zest the pompous pretensions and the inflated high-sounding terms in which their advertisements are drawn up. It is a fact not generally known that all medical quacks appear before the public under assumed names. One of the most notorious of the existing race of quacks has changed his name at least a dozen times, having made as many as 10 or 11 unsuccessful attempts to establish himself as an empiric. Proteus himself did not assume so many forms as some of the quack fraternity assume names when defeated in their efforts to impose on the public. Nor is it their names only that they change. They often vary the line of business in which they appear before the community. There is now living, in one of the streets leading out of Oxford Street, a consummate quack who makes experiments with great success on public ignorance and credulity, in the capacity of a physician that can cure all manner of diseases. who previously appeared in almost every conceivable department of medical charlatanism, always professing to confine himself exclusively to each particular department. He commenced as an eye doctor, but that would not do. Then he appeared, but with no greater success, as an aurist. A year or two afterwards, he undertook the cure of toothache, without extraction, or indeed without anything. Still the speculation did not answer. He eventually tried, with no better fortune, every other branch of the medical profession, and at last found that to be a universalist, a doctor who could cure every disease brought under his notice, was the only way in which he could hope to fill his pockets by gulling the public. With each profession, this ingenious empiric changed his name and also his residence. In 2 or 3 instances, indeed, he changed, if there be propriety in the expression, his country, for he suffered his beard to grow into luxuriant mustachios, and, having thus acquired something of the external aspect of a foreigner, he represented himself as Monsieur Maliton, from Paris. Impudence and assurance are still more essential to successful quackery. If the charlatan were to betray the slightest symptoms of confusion or embarrassment, either when a patient is dying in his hands or has already expired through the effects of his medicine or his treatment, he is manifestly incompetent for the office he has undertaken. His failure is a matter of moral certainty. He must view all such occurrences as matters of course, and unblushingly affirm that the parties were in the last stage of dissolution, and on the very verge of the grave, however little themselves or friends may have suspected it, before being placed under his care. If the quack be asked by anyone the disease under which his patient labours, his impudence must come to his aid, and he must protest, with all the confidence of an oracle, that it is a particular malady, giving some name or other, no matter whether the terms employed are to be found in medical vocabularies or not. In fact, it is generally the wisest and safest course to invent some jargon for the occasion, only taking care that the words flow fluently from the mouth. The more strange and unintelligible the terms made use of, so much the better, the patient not being, of course, in a condition to prove that there is no such disease, nor any such mode of describing it, and being, consequently, in excellent condition to come to the conclusion that the quack is a first-rate physician. Such deleterious medicine cannot be taken without producing disastrous results. Dr. Thornton made a calculation that, some years ago, several thousand children were annually killed by a quack medicine advertised as cakes for the cure of worms. It were much to be desired that some authentic information were accessible, representing the number of deaths which annually result from the effects of metropolitan quackery. Unhappily, however, no such information is to be had, nor is it likely it ever will be obtainable. For there are no means of ascertaining the number of patients who entrust their lives in the hands of empirics. That the amount of mortality attributable to the agency of these persons is great is unfortunately a too well attested fact. That 15 or 20,000 are yearly the victims of quackery is, I fear, no exaggerated supposition. That it must be great may safely enough be inferred from the fact that government derive a yearly revenue from the sale of quack medicines of between £50,000 and £60,000. The sources of this revenue are the stamps, the duty on advertisements, licenses, the patents, and the duty on the paper employed for wrapping up the medicine. It may be asked, do medical empirics or their nostrums ever effect a cure? There can be no question that cures have occurred when particular parties have been under the bands of quacks, or when taking a course of their medicines. But then, neither the empiric nor the medicine has anything to do with such cures. They are effected by nature herself, or it may be that the imagination of the parties is the principal agent in the matter. The cure, however, is ascribed to the empiric or his medicine, and thus the credulity of one patient paves the way for the credulity of others.